or that it has no value. Minor means that they're smaller books. The idea is that they are prophets who had a specific message, and it wasn't a lifetime. It was a very single point in time that they had this message. And so we're going to be looking at the book of Haggai. Um, Now, Haggai takes place after 50 years after the fall of Jerusalem. They had been carried off into Babylonian captivity, and God raises up a prophet, Haggai, who calls the people back to work. Now, understand that. So I want to give you a little bit of background so you have kind of idea of what we're talking about here. So let me give you. So we're going to start all the way back, reign of King Solomon, and during the 4th year of King Solomon's reign, King Solomon started this vast temple, the most magnificent temple of God, and the temple was more glorious than you can even imagine. People from all over the world traveled just to see it and offer their worship to God. It was completely amazing. But when King Solomon died, the people's hearts turned from God. And they got distracted, as people often do, and they started worshiping idols. And God allowed a series of events to take place in order to pull the people's heart back to himself. And in 587 BC, King Nebuchadnezzar and his army crushed the last vestiges of Israel in the southern kingdom of Judah, destroying the temple. Not only was it completely humiliating, destroying the whole city, grab all these people, but to add insult to injury, they demolished the house of God, they demolished the temple, stripping away the spiritual identity of the Jewish people, and they're completely devastated. And the Jews were taken into captivity for decades, specifically 50 years, technically 70, because they were already in captivity for a while before the destruction of the temple. But for 50 years after the temple and on, they were in captivity. Now, we often read this, and it just doesn't quite register in our minds. Like, they were taken in captivity. Okay, so let me try to make it modern context for you. Let's say that tomorrow a country announces, and we don't know which one, but an imaginary company comes up and says, we've invented the most devastating nuclear weapon known to man, and they prove it. Don't ask me how, they just prove it. And any country that refuses to surrender to us, we will destroy one major city every day until they do. And they're able to do it, and they're able to keep us from retaliating. And our country gets together, and the President of the United States comes up, and he says, and they meet with the council and stuff. We don't have a choice. I mean, we can't fight this. We can't defend ourselves from it. We just don't have a shot. And so they surrender. And this country comes in and strips everything, carries a bunch of us off to captivity, the best and the brightest, and leaves only the weakest, the elderly, and the children behind. And they take all the healthy young men and women, and they drag them off to their own country to make them that country's part of their country's help. And they strip all away our rights, and so you can't worship anymore, and you can't go to school anymore, and nobody's allowed to read. That's kind of what happened here. Maybe not to the extent that it was the whole world, but Babylon basically leveled Israel. They left nothing in place. So if you can understand that, put yourself in that mindset. And so that's the circumstances the Israelites found themselves in. So then you get to 538 BC, about 50,000 people are given permission to go back to Jerusalem, the capital of Judah, to rebuild. After 5 decades, they get to go back home. You get to rebuild a house for your God. You get to have your own place again, and you can only imagine the relief and the excitement. The Jewish people went back, And they started to rebuild the temple. They built the foundation and they built the altar, and then the Samaritans came. And they opposed their work, and suddenly they're like, oh no, this has just got too hard. This is too difficult, and it just not be the right time because this is just not easy for us to do, okay? See, that's the backstory. And so for 14 years, they didn't build on the temples. For 14 years, for 5 decades, that's all they thought about. And when it got difficult, they put the project on hold. Instead of working on God's house, they actually started building their own. And they built very, very nice houses, and they forgot all about why they were there. So what God did is he raised up the prophet Haggai to call the people back to rebuild the temple of God. Does that make sense? We're going to dive into verse 2. Haggai, chapter 1. And there's only 2 chapters. So and once you find the book, it's a small book. You won't get lost, okay? Because there's only 2 chapters to deal with. Okay? And it actually starts off to me as kind of funny because how many of you have children or had children or know somebody who has children? I think that pretty much covers everybody. And you ever noticed when your kid misbehaves, your spouse says, that's your children. They're mine when they're good, but that's your child. Ever had that happen? Ever heard that? Louisa, you ever say that to Humbert? Your son did such and such. Or your daughter. No? Really? Okay. Okay. So this is what the Lord Almighty says, and you might see this, but in Haggai chapter 1, verse 2, this is what the Lord Almighty says. He says, these people say the time has not yet come to rebuild the Lord's house. These people say the time has not yet come. Now, all throughout the Old Testament, what does he call Israel? My people who are called by my name. But they abandoned the work, and they quit. And God's saying, these people, not my people, these people. They're no longer my people. He's saying, these aren't my kids. Now that's pretty sad. That God is so distant from these people. They've so far walked away from him that he can't call them my people anymore. And he's calling them these people. Folks, what scares me most about that is Israel was God's chosen nation, right? And understand something. He didn't choose them because they were so special or so wonderful. God chose them because they were weak and small, and he wanted to use them to bless the rest of the world. That was the whole purpose in choosing Israel, was to bless the rest of humanity. That was what they were called to do, and they didn't do their job. Eventually, he blessed the rest of humanity by sending his son. But Israel's call was to bless the communities around them. That's what they were supposed to be doing. Just like what the church is supposed to be doing. Not having socials, sitting on its backside, doing nothing. And I dare say there are way too many churches that are nothing much more than social clubs. They never have lost people in there. They never do anything for outreach. All they do is reproduce biologically. It means they have kids. And even the kids don't stay. I read a very disturbing statistic that Southern Baptist churches, and I'm Southern Baptist, okay? Southern Baptist churches whose foundations are built on evangelism and spreading the gospel. Nearly 60% of the converts in the Southern Baptist Church come from the kids who grew up there. 60%. Not a portion. The church is only growing because these kids grew up there. And 2 out of 3 kids who reach high school age never come back to church. Once they graduate from high school, they're gone. So there's something wrong. Obviously, God is not going to bless us if we abandon him. And as a nation, my country has turned its back on God. We've been doing it since the 60s. We've been doing it since the 50s, believe it or not. When we got prosperous, we basically said, okay, God, we don't need your help anymore. When we were in the Great Depression, there was a spiritual awakening in this country. But in the 50s, when everything started going well, and all of a sudden we had all this extra money and everybody was prosperous, we never called on God. We never thanked him. We never sought his face. And then you got to the 60s, and we told our kids they weren't allowed to pray in school anymore, and we wiped religion and Christianity and God out of public life. And we're still fighting that battle. But if Israel was God's chosen nation, and when they turned their back on him, what's to keep God from tending us off into captivity? Because we're not his chosen nation. The church is his bride, is the bride of Christ. Don't get me wrong. And there was a remnant that was even saved in Israel who never turned. But I am afraid that that's where we're headed. Because we've turned our back on God. I still think that's what happened at 9/11. That was God removing his hand of protection from the United States. Because you kicked him out of school, and you kicked him out of the courts, and you kicked him out of government, and then you wonder why he didn't protect us? So these people is a truly sad statement. Because it's saying basically they're more focused on their comfort than on serving me. See, they thought the time wasn't now because they got opposition. The Samaritans were opposing him. And what's so funny is so often, whenever we receive opposition, we think, must not be God's will. It's just too hard. It's difficult. We need to understand that the closer we get to doing something that matters to the heart of God, the more likely we are to face opposition. Last night we started the service with a troll in here. It was kind of weird. He disappeared from my screen. I never saw him. But everybody in the congregation was telling me he was standing there behind me, screaming at me and calling me names and all this other stuff. I never saw the man. I had to finally go hunt for him to remove him from the property. Okay? It was very distracting. But I'll tell you right now, what that tells me is the more attacks we get, the more people oppose this ministry on Second Life, the more I assume that we're doing what God called us to do. And I don't care how hard it gets. We're doing what God called us to do. And we're serving him as he called us to. Do I see big numbers and do I see, no. So what? It's not about me growing a church. It's about God growing his kingdom. And we've got people that have been saved in Second Life, and they're no longer here. The reason they're no longer here is because they can't handle Second Life anymore. They get saved, and the temptation is too great, and there's a lot out there. that they end up leaving Second Life rather than taking the temptation of compromising their faith. One of the ladies who got saved in Second Life, and I'm not going to give you names, she owned a brothel in Second Life. When she became a Christian, she became convicted that she had to get out of this world. So we helped her find a church where she lived, and she plugged in and got out of here. I don't care one bit whether this church grows. What I want is to see God's kingdom grow. And it has nothing to do with my ego. But when opposition isn't a sign that God's against you, mostly it's a sign that you're doing what God wants. I don't really worry when people are opposing me. I worry when no one is. Because when I'm not doing much for the glory of God, Satan and the enemies, the world, don't pay any attention to me. I'm nothing. The more opposition I get when I'm doing the will of God is because the world and Satan hate me. They hate all believers. You gained an enemy when you became a Christian, and its name was the world, and the name was Satan. And if the world likes you, you got to worry. Are you doing what God called you to do? The moment you start to move forward and do something and be obedient to what God called you to do, mark it down. There's very likely spiritual opposition on the way. When you find yourself being obedient to God and it gets difficult and it gets challenging, and it does, I want to encourage you this very simple thought. Yeah, it's hard. Yeah, it's challenging. Yeah, it's difficult. But it's right. And a lot of times, doing the right thing is the difficult thing. It is the hard thing. One simple thought with God's help. Choose the hard right over the easy wrong. Over and over and over and over again. It would be so easy to quit because quit focusing on God and start focusing on myself. It would be hard and right to continue building the temple. Choose the hard right over the easy wrong. It would be so easy. When someone hurts your feeling in church, you say, well, I'm not going back to that church again. It would be so easy to hold a grudge and to be angry. But it's hard and right to forgive others as Christ has forgiven you. It's easy, so easy, to follow the world's way when it comes to sexuality. The hard right is to do it like God commanded it. It's so easy to use the entertainment and the garbage that's out there, to get sucked into the porno and the garbage on television and the nonsense. But it's hard to stay pure as God calls you to. It's so easy to make church unthreatening and so appealing. We've got the two-headed youth pastor over here juggling fire, and we've got the choir singing rock songs, and we don't open the Bible because we don't want to offend anybody. But we're not called to that. We're called to proclaim the gospel. And don't get me wrong, if the music is honoring God, it doesn't, music is music. And I've never seen a two-headed youth pastor, so that's an exaggeration. I've never seen one juggle fire either, besides that. But we think that we have to make church worldly so that people will come. And I hate to say it, but I've heard some big churches say stuff like that. Well, yeah, Louisa, but that's not what I was talking about. There are churches who say, well, we're not going to condemn. Well, there's no such thing as sin. There's no such thing as hell. The Bible teaches it, but we're not going. We don't believe it. There's some big time pastors out there who are teaching that hell doesn't exist and there is no such thing as sin. Claiming to be brothers and sisters in Christ. They're nothing but false prophets. But they tickle the people's ears, and that's what they want to hear. And yeah, they're popular. But you know what? If there's no opposition, if there's no spiritual opposition, then you got to wonder, are they doing what God called them to do? Are they building their own kingdoms? We're followers of Christ, folks, and with the help of God, we choose the hard right over the easy wrong. And that's what the prophet is telling these people to do. It's time to choose the hard right. It's time to do what you were called to do. Time is now. Now, for many of you, I want you to think for just a moment, ask yourself, is there some unfinished assignment in your life? Something that God has called you to do that you just got too busy to do. And I want you to think, and when I want you to experience the rest of this message through the lens of what might be an unfinished assignment for you. Think back. It could have been yesterday. It could have been a month ago. It could have been 14 years ago. Where you believe that God put something on your heart. Okay, I'm supposed to reach out to this person. I'm supposed to share my faith. But it's too hard, too difficult, and so you chose the easy path. Maybe God's called you to proclaim the gospel at work, and you're just too afraid to do it because you're afraid you get in trouble. And so you've never done it. And so nobody at work even knows you're a Christian. Or maybe God's called you to minister, to serve at your church, but you're just too busy. I've got a job, and I've got my family, and I just don't have time for that. So God, I'm sorry, but it's just too hard. Or, you know, I've got this job, and I make really good money, and so, you know, God, I just don't have time to serve. Because if I serve, I won't be able to make as much money, and I won't have this nice house and the fancy cars and all that other stuff. There's something on your heart that you really felt like it was a burden, most likely from God, but you didn't do it. Think about that for a moment, and if God shows you something, I want you to listen to the rest of the message through what might be an unfinished assignment. For many of you, what God may speak to you in the very same way He spoke to the people in the time of Haggai. He's going to say the time is now. So in verse 3, he says, this is what God said. Then the word of the Lord came to the prophet Haggai, and God said, it is time for you yourself to be living in your paneled houses. Is it a time for you to be living in your paneled houses while this house, my house, remains a ruin? Give careful thought to your ways, God says. Give careful thought. Think about how you're living. It is a time for you to live in these paneled houses when my house is left in ruin. And you may say, well, what in the world is a paneled house? Well, according to some commentaries, basically it's high-end living. They weren't just getting by. Okay? They were living high on the hog. They were wealthy. But they didn't have time to serve God. This is like in our world, you know, it'd be like having the granite tabletops, countertops, and the crown molding, and you got the high-end, high-definition television on the wall, and you got all this kind of stuff, and the gold toilet, and all that other stuff. And so this is not about God saying you can't have nice things. The point is that they had put the priority where? On themselves. It wasn't on doing what God called them to do. It was on themselves. He's against us putting nice things in His place. He's not against us having nice things. He doesn't want nice things to have us. At this point, some people are putting their own comfort ahead. And these people were putting their own comfort ahead of God's house and God's priority. And He's saying, give careful thought to your ways. And so I would raise the question right now as you look at this. Maybe an unfinished assignment, ask yourself, are you putting your own comfort ahead of His calling, okay? Are you trying to make a name more than you're trying to make a difference? Are you putting your house before his house? Are you consumed with yourself instead of being consumed with God and showing his love to other people? Is there something that you're putting ahead of God? Give careful thought to your ways. God wants us to choose the hard right over the easy living, over the easy way. And there'll be something in your life that you know you're supposed to do it, and God's called you to it, and like me, you're taking the easy wrong when God says, hey, choose the hard right. The time is now. And I want to show you some verses that to me are haunting to imagine that things have changed so little in 500 years before Christ. And this is what God says, and I guarantee you there are many of you here who say, I feel exactly like this. God says to them in verse 6, you planted much but harvested little. You eat but never have enough. You drink but never have your fill. You put on clothes but are not warm. You earn wages but you do not put in a purse with holes in it. Does that strike you like it does me? Let me put it into the kind of the modern version. You're working your tail off and you still don't think that you have anything. You're pouring your life into some career and it just feels empty and hollow. You have more than you ever had before and you still don't feel satisfied. You entertain yourself, you go to games, you go to movies, you eat out, yet there's still a longing for something more. Dr. Phil may look at you and say, now, how's that working for you? Right? Dead serious. Give careful thought to your ways. Think about it. Are you putting your house ahead of God? Is there some unfinished business? God led you to do something and you didn't do it. See, we choose the hard. We don't want to choose the hard. I can't help but think of Adoniah Judson and his brand new wife. Adoniah Judson was a missionary to a little country called Burma. Burma doesn't exist anymore. It's near Nepal. Anyway, God called him to be a missionary there. So he wrote his wife and he wrote his fiance and he said, I still want to marry you, but I need to tell you that my choice before me is hard. I'm going to be going to a country where it will be dangerous to proclaim the gospel. And while I'm there, I may suffer arrest, persecution. So I want, although I want you to come with me, I want you to be sure that this is what God has called you to. And she said, yes. Kind of an odd proposal, but it worked. So they went to Burma. Shortly after he was there, after beating his head, after doing all that stuff in Burma to try to proclaim the gospel, he was arrested, placed in a dungeon, and hung upside down every night by his feet. His wife would walk to the dungeon every day to plead for mercy for her husband. Pregnant, worn out, poor nutrition. Finally, his wife gave birth, and she was so weak that she wasn't even able to nurse the baby. And so she would go, the warden would give him mercy, and during the day would give him a furlough to go take his baby to the neighboring village so the women there can nurse it. And do you think that Adoniah Judson in the midst says, well, this is just too hard, God. I want to go home and sit on my easy chair. Why did you call me? I obviously didn't belong here because this is just so hard? Really? It's so hard? Adoniah Judson was finally released from the prison, and they managed to start church after church after church. His wife eventually died, and he ended up raising his daughter there as they ministered to those people. They managed to translate the scripture into the native language of the people of Burma, and every church in Burma can lean back to its history and see that it was planted by the ministry of Adoniah Judson. Every single one of them. Because God gave him a job to do, and he didn't sit there and say, well, this is too hard. I'm going to take the easy way out, God. This is just too hard. And so God comes back to these people, and he says, they're looking, oh, we got to build the temple. We don't feel good enough to do it. We're not doing well. There's opposition. This is difficult. And God says, okay, I'll give you the steps. I'm going to tell you how to build the temple. He's going to break it down into 3 simple steps. Okay, here's how you're going to build the temple. Here's what I want you to do. Number 1, go up into the mountains. Number 2, bring down the timber. And number 3, build my house. Okay? So, just in case you missed it. Number 1, go up in the mountains. Number 2, bring down the timber. And number 3, build my house. Okay? Now, some of us are sitting and saying, okay, God, that's great. But what are steps 4, 5, and 6? I need blueprints. I need to know who's going to pay for this, and I need to know how it's going to happen, and how are we going to go, and how we're going to get that stuff back down here. Am I going to get a tax write-off for this? I need to know details, God. How much time is going to take, and do I need to take time off from work, and am I going to get my name on the little temple because, on the little plaque on the temple because I didn't get my name on the original one? And if I don't get one, then I'm not going to feel good about it. And I need steps 4, 5, and 6, and 7, 8, and 9, and 10, 11, 12 to know where we're going with this, God. And God says, look, you don't need steps 4, 5, and 6. Just do 1, 2, and 3. My word is a lamp unto your feet and a light unto your path. If his word is a lamp unto our feet, he may show us steps 1, 2, and 3. And we won't see 4, 5, and 6 until we have the faith to step out in steps 1, 2, and 3. You see, you have to do what God showed you to do first before he reveals more to you. Sometimes you say, okay, God, I want the blueprints. I want the master plan. I want to see how the end of the book ends. I want the details. And God's saying, you don't need the details. I'll give you what you need. And when you get there, you will need to take, but you need to take that first step. What do? Go up on the mountain, bring down the timber, and start building my house. What do, God? I know you want me to work on it. Humble yourself. Apologize for what you've done wrong. Do what you used to do. Get up on the mountain, bring down the timber, and build my house. Step by step by step. I want you to think for a moment. You guys ever go out to dinner at night? You take your family. Let's say you take your family, you go out to dinner. So you're at the restaurant. It's dark when you leave. You get in your car to drive home. Your car's on the other side of town. It was a really fancy restaurant or a really special occasion. And so you get in the car and you turn on the headlights. Do the headlights illuminate your house from there? No. You know, it only shows you a couple hundred feet. So you drive that couple hundred feet and the light moves ahead of you. Guess what, guys? That's what God's saying. Your light, my light, is a lamp under your feet. You can only see the next step. But that's all you need because you got to learn to trust me. God's saying, trust me. You'll get home. Follow the path. And keep up with the light. But you're only going to get the illumination you need to make the next step. And that's what he's telling these people. Get up in the mountains, get the timber, and start building the house. I'll tell you the next step when we get there, but you've got to be obedient first. And we need to do the same thing. Guess what, guys? In the New Testament, we call that walking in the Spirit. That's what we're commanded to do as followers of Christ, is to walk in the Spirit. I want to know details. I want God to show me everything, but God's not going to show me step 4, 5, and 6 because I don't need to know it at this point. I need to learn to trust Him. So what do? Very simple. The way to get started is to quit talking and start doing. Amen, Louisa. Quit talking about it. Quit discussing it. Quit making excuses. And go to the mountain today. Do what he called you to do. Do the next thing that God has showed you and do it now. Be faithful to God. Be faithful to what he's called you to do. And you know, I keep thinking of two guys in the Old Testament. One made excuses. Oh, he was famous, but he never got to see the promised land because he started his ministry with, well, but God, I can't do, but God, but I can't, but God, I can't, but God, you don't know, but God. His name was Moses. And if you go read his story at the burning bush, it's all he did was make excuses. He kept trying to talk God into sending him, talk God out of sending him. And if you go to the very first section of Isaiah, God says, who can I send? And Isaiah's like raising his hand and shouting, here am I, God, send me. I don't know what's involved. I don't really care. I know that you want me to go. I'm going. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness. And I have often believed that when leaders rebel and leaders refuse, they lead their people to rebel. And I think part of the reason that Moses had such a hard time with the people of Israel and their rebellion is because he started his whole ministry with, well, but God, I can't talk well, or but God, I can't do that, or but God, making excuses. He didn't go into the promised land because he rebelled and the people started fussing, and so he struck the rock a second time. Don't miss it. You have an opportunity here. It was sitting here the whole time. It was there for you when you were ready for it. Don't miss these opportunities. And here's the deal. You may not know what blessings of God were on the other side of obedience. You have no idea how amazing the blessings of God would be until you get to the other side. Ultimately, you do what God calls you to do. So you're surprised to reach out to someone that hurt you, okay? What if you don't respond well? Listen, you're not responsible for the outcome. You're not responsible for the obedience. That's it. You just do what God calls you to do, and he takes care of the rest. Outcome is God's responsibility. Obedience is yours. Maybe you've got a sin that's been plaguing you, and you've been keeping it a secret. It's easy to keep it in a secret. It's hard and right to confess and ask for help. Maybe you're playing fake happy marriage, and you've got everybody around you fooled, and you're not there, and it's easy to do that. It's easy to lie. And it's hard and right to say, you know what? We need help. We really need something. We need counseling. Maybe God prompted you at some point to serve in the church, and I should make a difference. And is that what God, or is that Satan tempting me to serve? Get behind me, Satan. Don't use me to make a difference, okay? Of course, that's God. Okay, so what you're going to do, you'll choose the hard right, and don't leave the building today without saying, sign me up. You know, maybe God's called you to minister in Second Life. Maybe there's something he wants you to do. Maybe he wants you to proclaim the gospel wherever you go. Maybe he wants you to mill around in some of the places where it's not just all church people. And I know that goes on in Second Life. We have people who spend their entire visit in Second Life hopping from church to church. And while I appreciate the ministry part, the getting filled, the Dead Sea never does anything but take in anyway. And it is dead and decaying. If it never goes out, if you never push it out, if you never proclaim it, if it never flows over you, guess what? The only person that counts for you is you. If you're in a church in Second Life, you need to be serving in that church in Second Life. And I realize that there's not a lot of ministry positions in Grace, but you can do things like greet people, take time to come to the front door during the week when you're here on Second Life, and greet visitors who walk past. We get a lot of traffic that walks through here. I can't be here during the day because I have a job. I work during the day, but maybe you don't. Maybe you've got time. Maybe you've got time to participate in the Bible study on Friday night, or even start your own small group. I don't know what God is telling you to do, but I'm willing to do what God says rather than worrying about my own comfort. Is God leading me, or are you leading you? Is there some unfinished assignment? And so don't make God raise up a Haggai in your life to call you back. Don't make God say that person because you're his child. My child is going to be obedient. The time is now. So whatever God gives you an assignment, I want us to be obedient. Outcome is God's responsibility. Obedience is ours. We're going to choose to do what he calls us to do and to be obedient in what he calls us to do. The time is now. Join me as we close in prayer. Father, I'm going to confess that there are times where I have disobeyed you because I was afraid, or because it was uncomfortable, or because it called me to do something that didn't feel comfortable. Forgive us. Forgive Grace Baptist. Forgive the members of this congregation who've allowed themselves to fall into comfort because this is just too easy. Following you isn't easy. In fact, you promised us we would have trials and tribulations. And following you means that there are times we're going to have to step out in faith and do what you called us to do, even when it doesn't make sense. Examine each heart here, Lord. We want to be your people. We want to be your children, not that child. Help us to make the hard choices instead of the easy ones. We love you, Lord. Help us to be obedient, to understand that obeying leads us to the next step. And we don't know what blessings await us in that obedience. In your precious Son's name, amen. You know, when I was at Del Rio Community Church,